The energy core's diagnostic panel was displaying approximately 17 different error codes, which Marcus Webb considered a personal insult. He'd been working on Thessara IV's primary distribution network for 3 days, and the damn thing was fighting him at every step. The facility was hot. Thessarans apparently preferred temperatures that made humans feel like they were slowly baking, and his standard-issue core jumpsuit wasn't designed for prolonged exposure to what felt like a sauna crossed with a power plant. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of conductive grease he'd regret later, elbow-deep in circuitry that hummed with barely contained power. He was in that particular state of focus where the outside world faded to background noise, just him, the machine, and the problem that needed solving. Which was probably why he didn't notice the 2 Thessaran women entering the facility until David Chen's sharp intake of breath made him look up. They were striking, definitely warriors based on ceremonial armor that looked both decorative and functional. Identical twins, moving with synchronization that looked almost choreographed. Their skin was iridescent, shifting through colors Marcus didn't have names for, currently deep blue-silver with patterns that pulsed in perfect rhythm between them. They were also staring directly at him. Marcus waved awkwardly, still holding his plasma spanner. One twin tilted her head slightly, and the other mirrored the gesture exactly. It was simultaneously fascinating and deeply unsettling. David whispered that they were elite guards Stormborn clan, something significant he couldn't quite remember. Marcus, covered in grease and arguing with a power core, figured professional had left approximately 2 hours ago. David, apparently trying to fill awkward silence, asked if Marcus was doing anything after shift, mentioned the diplomatic reception, then pivoted to personal questions about whether Marcus was seeing anyone back home, had a partner, friends with benefits, anything. Marcus focused on the diagnostic panel, trying to trace a power fluctuation, and answered without thinking about his words, using his standard self-deprecating deflection. Nope, completely single, married to the job, as they say. He laughed at his own joke. The silence that followed made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He looked up slowly. The twin warriors were no longer blue-silver. They were brilliant gold and crimson, patterns pulsing so rapidly their skin looked like it was on fire. Their eyes, deep purple with silver flecks, were locked on him with expressions of what looked like shocked delight. Before Marcus could process, the twins moved with purpose, crossing the facility floor with identical steps that hit the ground in perfect unison. David backed away slowly. Marcus stood frozen as the warriors stopped directly in front of him, at least a foot taller than his 5'10", their synchronized presence overwhelming. "You have declared yourself available," the first twin said, her voice melodic with an accent that made standard sound almost musical. "Before witnesses," the second added, gesturing to assembled engineers and Thessaran observers who had materialized from nowhere. "In the presence of potential bondmates," they said together, perfectly synchronized. Marcus's brain was doing the mental equivalent of displaying error codes. The first twin placed her hand over her heart. "We are Kira." The second mirrored the gesture, and Sira. "Of the Stormborn clan," they finished in unison. "And we accept your courtship invitation," Kira continued. "We are honored by your choice," Sira added. Before Marcus could process, they both reached out, each taking one of his hands. Their skin was hot, significantly hotter than human standard, and the contact made their color patterns pulse brighter, waves of gold and crimson racing across their visible skin. Marcus tried to explain the misunderstanding, that he was just answering David's question about relationship status, but Kira cut him off, her expression radiating certainty, saying he'd declared it clearly. Sira added it was in formal context, before eligible partners. "That's the traditional invitation to courtship," they said together. Marcus looked desperately at David, who had pulled out his datapad and was frantically scrolling through cultural briefing documents, his expression suggesting he'd found something very relevant and very problematic. "The human accepts us," Kira announced to the assembled crowd. Cheering erupted, actual cheering. Engineers were applauding. Thessaran observers had hands over hearts in celebration. "Fate has delivered him," Sira proclaimed, more cheering. Someone was taking photographs. Marcus saw at least 3 people recording video. He tried again to explain the cultural misunderstanding, attempting to extract his hands, but the twins' grips were gentle and absolutely unyielding. Kira interrupted, saying they would court him properly. Sira continued that he would see fate was correct in bringing them together. Kira explained their bond required a shared mate. They'd waited years for the right partner. Sira finished that he declared himself at the perfect moment. Marcus's brain finally caught up with the words shared mate and our bond, and he felt panic rising, stammering that both of them at the same time was definitely a misunderstanding. "We are twin bonded," they said together, skin patterns synchronizing into identical waves. "What one feels, both feel. What one loves, both love. We cannot separate in matters of heart and body." Marcus heard himself responding with academic curiosity about the neurological perspective, because apparently his brain's response to panic was scientific interest, before trying to reset the entire conversation. The twins tugged gently on his hands, saying they would discuss this properly, away from his duties, in more appropriate setting. They started walking, and Marcus found himself being escorted toward the facility exit. He still had his plasma spanner. His diagnostic panel was beeping with unresolved errors. The power core was displaying fluctuations that really needed attention. He protested that he had to finish repairs. The energy core was unstable, but Kira said other engineers would complete the work. Sira explained his time was now dedicated to courtship. "That's how our culture honors new bonds," they said together. Marcus looked back at David desperately, calling for help. David looked at his datapad, at the twins, back at the datapad, then made the universal gesture of "you're on your own," and mouthed something that looked like "good luck" or possibly "you're doomed." The twins guided Marcus into blinding Thessaran sunlight. Their transport, sleek and designed for both speed and intimidation, waited nearby. Marcus saw his reflection. A human engineer covered in grease, holding a plasma spanner, being escorted by 2 warrior twins whose skin pulsed with joyful gold. This was either the most interesting day of his life or the worst diplomatic incident in human Thessaran relations. Kira and Sira exchanged a glance, brief but loaded with unspoken conversation. They agreed they could talk at their residence, where proper courtship begins, speaking in perfect unison. Marcus was guided into the surprisingly comfortable transport. The twins sat on either side, close enough that he could feel heat radiating from their skin, see patterns pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeat. As the transport lifted off, Marcus caught a glimpse of the facility receding. His comm was lighting up with messages from his supervisor, the diplomatic liaison, half the engineering corps. He was still holding his plasma spanner. Into the silence, he said, "So this is happening." "Yes," Kira and Sira said together, both smiling with identical expressions that somehow conveyed both synchronization and individual personalities. Marcus closed his eyes and wondered how exactly one explained to their commanding officer that they'd accidentally gotten engaged to 2 alien warrior twins because of a misunderstood joke about being single. Marcus found himself in an elegant residence overlooking Thessara's capital, the city sprawling below in patterns of light and architecture that seemed designed around principles of perfect symmetry. He'd been seated politely but firmly, on furniture that adjusted itself to human physiology, while Kira and Sira moved through the space with perfect coordination, preparing what looked like a formal meal. Every attempt he'd made to leave resulted in one or both twins appearing in front of him, with expressions of concerned confusion. His personal comm had been vibrating constantly for the past 20 minutes. Marcus finally pulled it out and saw messages cascading in. His supervisor demanding immediate explanation, David sending apologetic emojis mixed with what looked like excerpts from cultural briefing documents, and the diplomatic liaison using words like delicate situation and proceed with extreme caution in all capital letters. One message from the liaison stood out in its directness and urgency, telling him not to reject the courtship offer, that it would constitute major cultural insult with severe political ramifications, to comply until they could extract him diplomatically. Marcus looked up to find both twins watching him with those intense purple eyes, their skin patterns having shifted to something more subdued, blue-silver with hints of gray that probably indicated emotions he didn't understand yet. Kira observed that he was receiving communications about their bonding, and it wasn't a question but a statement of fact. Marcus said carefully that his people were concerned about cultural protocols, wanting to ensure he handled this appropriately. Sierra's tone carried something almost sad as she noted that his people wanted to ensure he didn't insult them by refusing, that they understood many potential mates accepted courtship only because rejection would cause offense, not because they genuinely wished to know them. Kira came to sit across from Marcus, Sierra joining her, and they moved with such perfect synchronization it was like watching one person split into two bodies. Kira said they should clarify expectations, establish clear understanding before courtship proceeded. Marcus expressed genuine relief, admitting he was completely lost. Sierra's lips quirked slightly, maybe amusement, noting that his honesty about confusion was rarer than he might think, that most potential mates pretended to understand their culture while privately researching frantically. Marcus admitted he was definitely going to research frantically later, but right now he was just confused and trying not to cause a diplomatic incident. Both twins' color patterns shifted slightly toward warmer tones, gold creeping back into the blue-silver. They explained that honesty was valued in their culture more than false understanding. Marcus asked them to explain what just happened, because in his culture, telling someone you're single was just a statement of fact, didn't mean anything except that you weren't currently in a relationship. Sierra leaned forward, explaining that he'd stated it before eligible potential partners, in formal setting with witnesses, which was the traditional structure of courtship invitation in Thessaran culture. Marcus protested that he didn't know it was formal setting. He was fixing a power core and answering nosy questions. There was nothing formal about it. Kira explained the location was formal, the planetary energy facility being a site of diplomatic cooperation, his presence there in official capacity. Marcus objected that he wasn't being diplomatic. He was literally covered in grease arguing with malfunctioning equipment. Sierra repeated that it was official capacity, and they were elite warriors present as cultural observers per diplomatic protocol, making them official representatives as well. Kira continued that when he declared availability before them, with witnesses, in official setting, Sierra finishing that it met all traditional requirements for formal courtship invitation. Marcus sat back processing this, summarizing that from their perspective, he'd basically walked up to them and formally asked them out in front of everyone. The twins confirmed in unison. Kira continued, gesturing between herself and Sierra, that because they were twin-bonded, they couldn't accept courtship separately. Sierra explained what one bonded with, both must bond with, their neural connection making individual romantic or sexual relationships impossible, that they shared all emotions and physical sensations, and if one bonded with someone while the other didn't, it would cause them both severe psychological pain. Marcus absorbed this, clarifying that they both accepted together because they literally couldn't do relationships any other way. Kira confirmed this was correct, and Sierra added they'd been searching for a compatible partner for many years, her tone carrying weight. She explained that most potential mates were frightened by their bond, didn't understand how to love two people who were essentially one mind in two bodies. Kira said others tried to favor one of them over the other. her skin patterns flickering with what might have been old pain, explaining that they formed preference and showed attention differently. But since they felt everything the other felt, rejection of one was rejection of both, and favoritism toward one caused jealousy in both. "It is complicated," they said together, their color patterns synchronizing into matching waves of blue-gray. Marcus said honestly that it sounded incredibly difficult, both for them and for anyone trying to date them. Sierra simply agreed. Kira added they were 28 standard years, well past the typical bonding age for their people, and when Marcus had declared availability and they saw he was human, not Thessaran, they thought perhaps someone from outside their culture might understand their bond differently, might not be frightened or confused by what they were. Marcus asked if they'd immediately claimed him because they thought a human might handle the whole twin bond situation better than their own species. Both twins' color patterns shifted toward warmer golds again, and he was starting to recognize that as something like hope or happiness. Sierra observed he understood quickly that this was promising. Marcus said he was an engineer, good with systems and how components interact, but understanding intellectually and actually being able to navigate a relationship with twin-bonded partners were very different things. The twins acknowledged they knew this, which was why they'd like to formally request a courtship period, time for him to know them and them to know him, to discover if compatibility truly existed. Marcus asked how long courtship period usually was. Sierra said it was variable, sometimes days, sometimes months, depending on the individuals involved. Marcus asked what happened if after courtship period one or more parties decided bonding wasn't appropriate. Kira said courtship ends with honor, no insult, no political ramifications, no cultural offense. That courtship was specifically designed as exploration without commitment. Marcus felt some of his panic easing, clarifying that he wasn't actually engaged or bonded or whatever right now. They were just in a trial period to see if they were compatible. The twins confirmed this was correct, though Sierra added carefully that publicly, their people already considered him their chosen mate. There had been celebration in the facility, word would have spread. He'd be treated as their bond partner until courtship either succeeded or formally ended. Marcus tried to summarize that socially he was already married to both of them but legally just dating. Kira confirmed this was approximately accurate, though married wasn't quite correct translation. Bonded was more precise, but yes, for practical purposes he'd summarized correctly. Marcus thought about his options. Refuse and cause diplomatic incident, get extracted and be that human who insulted the Stormborn twins, or agree to courtship period, actually get to know Kira and Sierra and make an informed decision. His comm vibrated with another message from the liaison telling him to accept whatever they were offering, to buy time for proper extraction. Marcus looked at the twins watching him with expressions that tried for neutral but couldn't quite hide their hope, their skin patterns pulsing with anticipation, synchronized waves of blue and silver and gold. He said he had questions. Kira replied they would answer. Marcus asked what exactly courtship entailed. What were the expectations and activities? Sierra's color patterns shifted toward amused rose gold as she explained they showed him their lives. He showed them his. They spent time together learning about each other, discovering compatibility, activities varying based on interests and comfort. Marcus asked, feeling his face heat, if there were physical expectations. Both twins' patterns shifted through several rapid colors he couldn't interpret. Kira said carefully that physical bonding was the ultimate goal of successful courtship, but occurred only after emotional and intellectual compatibility was established. They wouldn't pressure him toward physical intimacy before he was ready. Sierra added their culture valued consent absolutely. Forced or coerced bonding was among the worst crimes possible. Any physical contact required enthusiastic agreement from all parties. Marcus said that was good to know, feeling marginally less panicked, asking how long he had to decide whether to continue to actual bonding if he agreed to courtship. Kira said as long as he needed, days, weeks, months, the decision was too important to rush. Sierra admitted they hoped he'd know sooner rather than later. Prolonged uncertainty was difficult for them emotionally. Marcus understood it was because they shared emotions, so if one was anxious about his decision, both felt that anxiety. They confirmed together exactly. Marcus sat with this information, turning it over like a complex engineering problem. The logical choice was politely declining and extracting himself. But logic would also insult two genuinely earnest people, cause diplomatic problems, and eliminate what might be interesting. And honestly, Kira and Sierra were fascinating. The neural bond alone was incredible scientifically. They were both intelligent, direct communicators, and apparently capable of synchronized movements suggesting remarkable cognitive coordination. Marcus heard himself say 3 days. Give him 3 days of courtship, show him their lives, let him get to know them both. After 3 days, he'd decide whether to continue or formally end courtship. Fair. Both twins' skin patterns exploded into brilliant gold, brighter than he'd seen yet, their expressions radiating joy so intense it was almost overwhelming. They accepted these terms, promising to prove themselves worthy of his consideration. They both stood simultaneously, moving toward Marcus with synchronized steps, and before he could react they were embracing him from both sides, their warmth surrounding him, skin patterns pulsing with happiness. Marcus awkwardly patted each of their backs, still holding his plasma spanner because he'd apparently carried it through this entire interaction. He said into their embrace that okay, 3 days, starting now he guessed. They pulled back, both smiling with expressions that were identical, yet somehow conveyed their individual personalities. Kira's slightly more reserved and analytical, Sierra's warmer and more openly emotional. They confirmed together starting now. Kira said first he would eat. He'd been working many hours without proper nutrition, returning to the prepared food. Sierra continued they'd show him their home properly and explain more about their bond and culture. Kira finished that tomorrow they'd begin full courtship activities. Marcus looked at the food that actually smelled amazing despite being completely unfamiliar, looked at the twins watching him with hopeful expressions and glowing skin patterns, looked at his plasma spanner which he finally set down on the nearby table. He said, all right, 3 days, let's see where this goes. Somewhere in his mind, the part preferring logic and predictability was screaming. But the part that had always been curious about new experiences, the part that made him a good engineer because he could see potential in unexpected configurations, that part was genuinely interested in what came next. Marcus had accidentally proposed to 2 alien warrior twins because of a joke about being single. His life had officially become stranger than any science fiction he'd ever read. But as Kira and Sierra served him food and began explaining the intricacies of their bond with genuine enthusiasm, Marcus found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, strange wasn't necessarily bad, just unprecedented. And as an engineer, he'd always enjoyed solving unprecedented problems. The 3 days became a revelation. Marcus woke on day 2 to find Kira and Sierra already in the residence's training arena, a space he hadn't noticed the previous evening. They moved through combat forms with practice weapons, and watching them was like witnessing a perfectly optimized system in action. Every strike from Kira flowed seamlessly into a defensive posture from Sierra. Every advance Sierra made was covered by Kira's positioning. They fought like water, like they occupied the same space in 2 bodies, never colliding, always synchronized. Marcus stood in the doorway watching, fascinated despite having absolutely zero interest in combat. This wasn't about violence. It was about coordination at a level that shouldn't be biologically possible. When they noticed him, both twins lowered their practice blades simultaneously, their skin patterns shifting from focused crimson to pleased gold. They invited him to join them, and Marcus protested he was an engineer, not a soldier. He didn't really fight. Sierra said gently that everyone fights sometimes, asked him to show them how he solved problems with his body instead of his mind. Reluctantly, Marcus demonstrated basic self-defense from his core orientation, practical moves focused on escape rather than engagement. The twins watched with intense concentration, then showed him how they'd approach the same scenarios. Their teaching style was patient and encouraging, and Marcus found himself actually enjoying the physical activity and their commentary. During breaks they talked, and Marcus learned that Kira was the strategist, always thinking 3 moves ahead, analyzing patterns in everything from combat to conversation. Sira was the tactician, reading opponents and situations in real time, adapting instantly to changing variables. Together they were formidable because they combined long-term planning with immediate adaptability, their neural bond allowing them to coordinate both levels simultaneously. But they were also vulnerable in ways Marcus hadn't expected. Kira admitted during one conversation that they frightened people, not because they were warriors, but because they were too close. People didn't understand how to connect with a bond that had no space for secrets. Sira added that everything they felt together, joy, pain, pleasure, sorrow. There was no hiding, no privacy of emotion. Most potential mates found this suffocating. Marcus said honestly, it sounded intense but not necessarily bad, just different. Both twins' skin patterns shifted to surprised rose gold, and he realized he'd said something unexpected and valued. They took him to see their homelands, vast training grounds where Thessaran warriors practiced forms that looked like deadly choreography, markets filled with goods that smelled and looked completely alien, temples devoted to concepts of perfect unity that Marcus didn't fully grasp but found aesthetically beautiful. Everywhere they went, people recognized the twins and offered respectful greetings, but Marcus noticed that while they were respected, they were also somewhat isolated. Other Thessarans kept distance, as if the twins' bond created a space others couldn't or wouldn't enter. By day 3, Marcus had learned to read their color shifts: gold for joy, blue for calm, crimson for excitement or focus, silver for contemplation, gray for sadness or uncertainty. He'd learned that Kira loved spicy food that made Marcus's eyes water, while Sira preferred sweet things. He found all them as people with specific skills who'd been slotted into roles based on those skills regardless of whether those were their only or best skills. It was the same problem everywhere. People got defined by one capability, and everything else got ignored. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, and Kira observed that he understood being underestimated. People saw engineer and missed everything else he was. Marcus said exactly, feeling seen in a way he hadn't expected. That evening they asked him to make his decision. They sat together in the residence's garden, surrounded by bioluminescent plants that pulsed in rhythms similar to the twins' skin patterns. Sira said quietly that 3 days had passed. They'd shown him who they were. Now he must decide if he wished to continue courtship or part with honor. Marcus had been thinking about this constantly. The logical choice was politely declining and returning to his delegation. This situation was complicated, culturally foreign, potentially diplomatically sensitive. The logical choice was obvious. But he heard himself saying he wanted to keep seeing them, both of them. He knew this was complicated, and he still didn't fully understand their bonding customs, but he genuinely liked spending time with them. They were brilliant and funny and made him think about things differently. So yes, he wanted to continue whatever this was. The twins' skin patterns exploded into radiant gold, brighter than Marcus had ever seen, and they both moved at once. Suddenly he was being embraced from both sides, their warmth surrounding him, their joy palpable in the way their skin pulsed and their arms tightened around him. Kira said, her voice thick with emotion, that he honored them. Sira added they would prove worthy of his choice. Marcus laughed, slightly overwhelmed, saying they already had. That's why he was choosing this. They separated slowly, both smiling with identical expressions that still somehow conveyed their individual personalities. Kira warned that their people would celebrate this decision. There would be ceremonies, announcements, attention. Sierra added their families would wish to meet him, would have many questions. Marcus asked, feeling slightly panicked, but committed if nothing about this was going to be simple. Both twins said in perfect synchronization no. Then Sierra added, but they would navigate it together. Kira said that tomorrow they would introduce him to their family, the Stormborn clan elders who would want to assess his suitability. Sierra explained this was traditional, not optional, and could be intimidating. Marcus asked how intimidated he should be on a scale of 1 to 10. Both twins' skin patterns flickered with amused gold, and Kira said honestly around an 8. Her family took bonding very seriously. Sierra added but they would be there with him, would not let him face the assessment alone. Marcus appreciated this more than he could articulate. They spent the rest of the evening talking about logistics, how courtship would progress now that initial 3 days were complete, what cultural expectations existed, what flexibility there might be for human comfort. Kira explained that traditionally, courting partners spent increasing amounts of time together, learning each other's lives in detail. Sierra added that physical affection would escalate gradually as comfort grew, but always with explicit consent. They would hold hands before embracing, embrace before kissing, kiss before more intimate contact. Each step required mutual agreement. Marcus found this methodical approach both reassuring and slightly amusing, noting it was very structured for something as chaotic as feelings. Kira's skin patterns shifted to pleased blue as she said structure created safety for exploring chaos. Sierra added that their bond meant they experienced emotions intensely. Structure helped them navigate that intensity without becoming overwhelmed. Marcus understood then that the courtship protocols weren't just cultural tradition. They were psychological necessity for people whose emotional lives were shared between two minds. As the evening ended, Sierra asked if Marcus would stay the night, quickly clarifying they meant in the guest quarters, separate sleeping arrangements. But it was traditional for courting partners to share living space increasingly as courtship progressed. Marcus agreed, realizing his delegation was going to have opinions about this, but also recognizing that he'd committed to exploring this relationship honestly, and that meant actually spending time with Kira and Sierra. He messaged his supervisor explaining he'd be staying off base for cultural observation purposes, which was technically true even if it left out the whole accidentally courting twin warriors situation. The response was surprisingly supportive, noting that deeper cultural integration served diplomatic purposes. Marcus suspected the liaison had already briefed everyone on the delicate situation and the need to avoid insulting the Stormborn twins. As he settled into the guest quarters, which were surprisingly comfortable with that same adaptive furniture that adjusted to human physiology, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in 72 hours. He'd arrived on Thessara IV to fix a power core, and had somehow ended up in a courtship with two brilliant, synchronized warriors who were giving him access to a culture and experience he never would have imagined. His door chimed softly, and both twins entered at his acknowledgement, their skin patterns subdued in the low evening light. They sat on either side of his bed, not touching but close, and Kira said they wanted to explain something about their bond before courtship continued further. Marcus sat up, giving them his full attention. Sierra began explaining that their neural connection meant they shared not just emotions but also physical sensations to some degree. When one was hurt, the other felt echoes of that pain. When one experienced pleasure, the other shared in it. Marcus started to understand the implications for physical bonding and felt his face heat. Kira continued that this meant when they eventually reached physical intimacy, all three of them would be participating even if only two were directly involved at any given moment. Whatever Marcus did with one, the other would feel. Sierra finished that this was part of why they needed a partner who could love them both equally, because favoritism would be apparent not just emotionally but physically. Marcus absorbed this, his engineer brain trying to map out the logistics before his emotional brain caught up. He asked if this meant they couldn't be intimate separately, like if he was with Kira, Sierra would be experiencing everything too. They confirmed in unison. Kira added this was why many potential mates rejected them after learning this detail. The idea of never having private, intimate moments felt invasive. Marcus thought about it, trying to be honest about his comfort level. He said he could see how that would be intense and possibly overwhelming, but he could also see how it might be incredibly intimate in a way separate relationships couldn't achieve. Both twins' skin patterns brightened with surprised gold. Sierra said softly that no potential mate had ever framed it that way before, as increased intimacy rather than lost privacy. Marcus shrugged, saying he wasn't sure how he'd actually feel in the moment. But conceptually, it seemed like being vulnerable with two people who were completely honest about sharing everything was more intimate than the usual human relationship, where people kept parts of themselves hidden. Kira reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and took Marcus's hand. Sierra mirrored the action with his other hand. They sat like that for a moment, connected, the twins' skin patterns pulsing in synchronization, warm and steady. They thanked him for his honesty and his willingness to see their bond as strength rather than limitation. Marcus said they'd been honest with him from the beginning. The least he could do was be honest back. They left him to sleep, but the warmth of their hands and the glow of their skin patterns stayed with him as he drifted off, thinking that maybe unprecedented wasn't just interesting. It was exactly what he'd been missing without knowing it. The following weeks were chaotic in the best and most overwhelming ways. Marcus continued his engineering work, finally solving the energy core problem with insights derived from conversations with Kira and Sierra about synchronization and redundancy. His delegation was initially concerned about his increasingly serious courtship, but became cautiously supportive when they realized the relationship was significantly improving diplomatic relations. The Thessaran leadership was openly delighted, the Stormborn twins accepting a human mate being seen as a powerful symbol of cultural exchange and cooperation. Marcus navigated increasingly complex courtship rituals while learning the true depth of Kira and Sierra's bond through daily interaction. He witnessed how they could communicate entire concepts through minute color shifts and micro-expressions, how they finished not just each other's sentences, but each other's thoughts mid-word, how what one experienced the other felt with sometimes overwhelming intensity. One afternoon Kira was injured during advanced combat training, taking a practice blade strike to her shoulder that, while not serious, was definitely painful. Sierra, who was across the training arena talking with Marcus, gasped and grabbed her own shoulder in the exact spot, her skin patterns flashing with shared pain. Marcus rushed to help both of them, and as he treated Kira's wound while Sierra winced sympathetically beside them, he understood viscerally how completely their lives were intertwined. They didn't just share emotions abstractly, they shared physical sensation in real time. Living like this must be overwhelming, he observed while bandaging Kira's shoulder as Sierra's breathing synchronized with her sister's pain responses. Kira said it was their normal, but yes, it could be intense, which was why they needed someone who could be steady for both of them, an anchor when the shared emotions became storms. Marcus promised quietly that he could do that, be steady, be the anchor. And both twins looked at him with expressions of profound gratitude and what he was increasingly recognizing as love. The meeting with their family was exactly as intimidating as promised. The Stormborn clan gathered in a ceremonial hall that looked designed to make visitors feel very small and very judged. Multiple generations of warriors, all moving with that particular lethal grace that marked serious martial training, all watching Marcus with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. He was questioned extensively about his intentions toward Kira and Sierra, his understanding of Thessaran culture, his ability to handle the complexity of twin bonding, his career plans, and how they would integrate with the twins' responsibilities. Marcus answered as honestly as possible. He cared about both Kira and Sira as individuals. He was learning to love them as a bonded unit. He understood there would be challenges, but they were worth navigating, because the twins were remarkable people who deserved a partner who saw them clearly. He admitted he didn't have everything figured out. Logistics would be complicated. His career would need adjustment. But he was committed to making this work, because, for the first time in his life, he'd found people who made him want to be more than just an engineer solving problems in isolation. The family matriarch, a formidable warrior named Thesson whose skin patterns were shot through with silver indicating great age and wisdom, studied Marcus with intense focus. She finally said he was not what they'd expected for Kira and Sira. Marcus acknowledged he was aware. He wasn't a warrior or strategist or anyone impressive by Thesseran standards. Thesson disagreed, saying no, he was a builder, a creator, someone who saw systems and made them work better. She smiled, the expression transforming her austere features into something almost warm, and said that was exactly what the twins needed. Not another warrior to match their intensity, but someone who could build stability where they brought fire. Someone who would see them as more than weapons and help them become more than their culture had confined them to be. The approval felt significant, and Marcus saw both twins' skin patterns shift to profoundly relieved gold, realized they'd been genuinely worried their family wouldn't accept him. Over dinner with the extended clan, Marcus was regaled with stories of Kira and Sira's childhood, their early training, the moment their bond had fully manifested around age 7, and they'd suddenly been able to feel each other's emotions and physical sensations. It had been disorienting at first, Thesson explained, two children suddenly experiencing the world through two sets of senses simultaneously. But they'd adapted with remarkable speed, learning to use their bond as a strength rather than a limitation. By adolescence, they were already demonstrating the perfect synchronization that made them elite warriors. Kira, sitting beside Marcus with her hand resting comfortably on his, admitted quietly that they'd spent their teenage years thinking they'd never find a compatible partner, that their bond made them too strange, too intense, too complicated for anyone to love. Sira, on his other side, added that watching other bondings happen around them while they remained unbonded had been increasingly painful each year. They'd almost given up, resigned to remaining bonded only to each other, when Marcus had made his accidental declaration. Marcus looked between them, these two brilliant warriors who fought like water and thought like a shared consciousness, who'd been lonely in the middle of loving family simply because their bond made romantic love seem impossible. He squeezed both their hands and said quietly that their bond wasn't a limitation. It was what made them extraordinary. Any potential mate who couldn't see that wasn't worthy of them. Both twins' eyes brightened with emotion, skin patterns pulsing with gold so bright it lit the space around them, and Marcus felt the family's collective approval like a physical presence. He'd passed whatever test they'd been administering. The real turning point came during a crisis. The energy core Marcus had repaired experienced a catastrophic fluctuation that threatened the entire facility and potentially a significant portion of the capital city. Marcus rushed to the site receiving emergency alerts, and Kira and Sira insisted on accompanying him despite the danger. He protested it wasn't safe. They were warriors, not engineers. They couldn't help with this. Kira said they could help him stay calm. He worked better when he wasn't managing fear alone. Sira added they could share that burden. It was what bonded partners did. They entered the facility together, Marcus's delegation and Thessaran engineers already evacuating as proximity alarms screamed warnings about imminent failure. Marcus went straight to the core, pulling up diagnostics and seeing cascading errors that painted a picture of complete systemic collapse within minutes. The facility shuddered with power surges. Energy conduits exploded in showers of sparks. Debris fell from the ceiling. It was absolute chaos. But every time Marcus started to panic, feeling his hands shake and his concentration fragment, he felt Kira's steady presence at his shoulder, her hand warm and grounding on his back. Sira positioned herself where she could shield him from falling debris while also keeping sight lines clear for evacuation if needed. They didn't understand the engineering, but they understood him. They knew when he needed space to think and when he needed grounding touch. They trusted his expertise completely while offering steady support. Marcus worked frantically, rerouting power, bypassing failed systems, manually overriding safety protocols that were causing more problems than they solved. The twins evacuated other remaining personnel while he worked, their combat training making them efficient at moving people quickly. They returned to his position and simply held space for him, Kira's hand on his shoulder, Sira's presence at his back, both of them sharing the fear and determination and focus he was experiencing. He solved the problem with seconds to spare, initiating emergency shutdown sequences that stabilized the core right before it would have achieved critical failure. As the facility's alarms shifted from crisis to cautionary, Marcus collapsed against his control panel, shaking with adrenaline crash, and the knowledge that he'd been maybe 90 seconds from being vaporized along with several thousand other beings. Kira and Sira were there immediately, surrounding him with warmth and reassurance, their hands gentle and their voices soft. Kira said he'd saved everyone, he'd been brilliant. Sira added he'd been terrifying to watch, working with such focus while everything exploded around him. Marcus managed to say through the adrenaline shakes that they'd been terrifying too. That situation could have killed them all, and they'd stayed just to keep him calm. Both twins said together of course they did. He was theirs. They protected what was theirs. Something fundamental shifted in Marcus in that moment. The logical part of his brain that had been maintaining careful distance, keeping this as complicated courtship rather than something deeper, finally surrendered to the reality that he loved them. Both of them completely, in ways he'd never loved anyone before. He looked between Kira and Sira, these warriors who'd risked their lives just to be emotional support during an engineering crisis, and said with complete honesty that he loved them. Both of them. He didn't know when it had happened or how logistics would work long-term, but he loved them absolutely. Their skin patterns exploded into colors Marcus had never seen, brilliant combinations of gold and crimson and silver swirling together in patterns that synchronized and diverged and reunited in waves that seemed to pulse with pure joy. They both embraced him, and Marcus felt their happiness like a physical force, overwhelming and beautiful. Kira said they loved him, had loved him since he saw them as individuals within their bond. Sira added since he treated their complexity as fascinating rather than frightening. They stayed there among the machinery, holding each other, until emergency responders arrived and insisted on medical evaluation for everyone. The diplomatic implications of a human-engineer bonding with Thessaran elite twins were significant and complicated. There were meetings and briefings and cultural assessments, but Marcus discovered he didn't actually care about the politics. His delegation was supportive, understanding that genuine cross-cultural bonds served everyone's interests. The Thessaran leadership was thrilled, seeing this as a new model for cooperation. And most importantly, Kira and Sira were happy in ways they'd never been before. Their family reported, more balanced and open, because they finally had someone who could love all of what they were. The formal bonding ceremony happened 3 months after Marcus's accidental proposal, once enough cultural protocols had been navigated, and both human and Thessaran legal frameworks had been satisfied. It was a blend of traditions, Marcus standing in ceremonial clothing that combined human and Thessaran elements, making vows before assembled crowds from both their peoples. He promised to be their anchor while they were his strength, to love them individually while honoring their bond, to build with them something unprecedented that would serve as a bridge between their worlds. When the ceremony concluded, Kira took his left hand, Sira took his right, and they walked forward together as a bonded unit, 3 people building one partnership with infinite complexity. Marcus thought back to that offhand joke in the energy facility, completely single, married to the job, and laughed at how dramatically fate or cultural misunderstanding had redirected his life. Sierra asked what was funny. Marcus said he was just thinking about how he'd accidentally proposed to both of them with 2 words and complete lack of cultural awareness. Kira grinned and said it was the best mistake he'd ever made. Marcus agreed, squeezing both their hands. Definitely the best mistake. They walked together into their future, an engineer and 2 warriors, building something unprecedented between their cultures. Not because it was planned or logical or even remotely simple, but because sometimes the universe delivered exactly what you needed disguised as a joke you weren't supposed to take seriously. And sometimes being unable to let go of something unexpected was exactly how you found what you'd been missing all along. The story ended with them overlooking Thessara's capital at sunset, 3 silhouettes against.
Ja, auch das zum Beispiel ist jetzt schon ein Tornado, haben wir gesagt, es kommt, aber Rotation geht schon bis zum Boden. Er ist nicht auskondensiert bis zum Boden, aber das muss ein Tornado auch nicht sein. Es geht nur darum, dass die Rotation, die oben ist, bis zum Boden durch. Jetzt ist er kurz auskondensiert, da hat man jetzt kurz den Rüssel gesehen. Und wir waren praktisch im Beer's Cage drin. Ne? Die Zelle, der Niederschlag war hier von der Zelle. Ja. Und da hast du auch schon wirklich das Rauschen gehört stark. Ne? Da sind auch schon Bäume und alles umgefallen. Ein bisschen Debris sieht man, glaube ich, tatsächlich auch ab und zu mal. Und der hat sich dann aber immer weiter verstärkt jetzt, also jetzt gerade hier in der Phase. Es wird wahrscheinlich da ein EF1 gewesen sein. Schon sehr dynamisch, auch sehr breit tatsächlich, seht ihr schon, ne? Das alles rotiert.
Geht's halt schon richtig ab.
Ja, klar. Ist nicht das fotogenste, aber auch da wieder. Ne? Es ist halt eine der schwersten Naturgewalten überhaupt, ne? Das muss man einfach sagen.
Übelst breit unten.
Ja. Und er war halt wirklich nicht weit weg.